Karras and the Third Man. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you play Les Marseillaise? Because it's Bastille Day. Well, just hold your horses there. We are going to play a couple of versions. It is Bastille Day, and I recognize that. It's my probably my favorite period of time, that and Garibaldi in European history. I love revolutions. But this is Randy Credico, by the way. Randy Credico, live on the fly on 99.5 FM in New York City, WBAI.org. If you'd like to support the station, which I highly recommend, go to give2WBAI.org. This is not an Assange show. The Assange show is no longer at this station, but don't despair. The Assange show was on Saturday for the last 14, 15 weeks, but we've been doing it in different places anyway for the last 5 years. It will be continuing. Don't despair. Every Saturday at 6 p.m., since people are comfortable with that time slot, at our website, AssangeCountdownToFreedom.com, or the YouTube channel, which is live on the fly, and it will be on Podtails and iTunes and a whole bunch of other platforms. But it's simply Assange Countdown to Freedom. We're going back to where we were before we did it here, beginning in, I think, February or March. So, it's all good. Now, it is Bastille Day, and I'm going to drink myself a cup of coffee, the way both Balzac and the great Voltaire drank. Only 40 cups a day is what they drank. I drink like 5 or 6. All right, so we're going to play the last Marseillaise. Now, this late Marseillaise, this is from Casablanca. Remember the scene when the Germans are singing something like Horse Vessel or something, and Paul Henry gets everybody in that Rick's place to start singing Les Marseillaise. All right, we're going to play that and come back with my guest, the author, Dr. Cliff Connor.
Play La Marseillaise. Play it.
That was a version of La Marseillaise. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City. Today is Bastille Day, July 14th, 1789. And so that's the topic of today's show, is Bastille Day. Happy Bastille Day to everybody once again. I'm being joined by a wonderful historian. He writes about science and he writes about history, particularly the French Revolution. That's Cliff Connor, who I've had on before on the Assange show, but this is not an Assange show. That's on Assange Countdown to Freedom, if you want to see it, last year. So Cliff, it's a thrill to see you again or hear you again here now on WBAI.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
I got your book right here on Marat, which I really enjoyed. He's my favorite figure. And there are a lot of characters from the French Revolution that stand out, but he stands out, I think, higher than anybody. Would you say?
Well, it looks to me like you have a dog-eared copy there, which means you read it thoroughly, and I appreciate that. Yes, I agree. I think Marat was very important. That's a point of difference with a lot of historians, by the way. I don't know if you want to get into that or not. Maybe we should just get back to Bastille Day.
Yeah. But if you want, we did a whole hour on Marat, and you can get that at randycredico.com, the full hour on Marat. But we could talk about Marat for hours. It was such a colorful life and interesting life and an important life. And the guy was as versatile as I think maybe his antagonist, somewhat Thomas Paine. Paine was a scientist as well, a bridge builder and revolutionary writer.
I don't think they wound up as antagonists, by the way. I think Tom Paine came to appreciate Marat and vice versa at the end, although the beginning of their relationship was not good. And it wasn't Tom Paine's fault. He had come to France and got under the influence of the moderate faction, unbeknownst to him. And so he wound up at loggerheads with Marat for a little while. But at the end, I'm pretty sure they appreciated each other.
Right. Well, next year we'll do something on the great Tom Paine, but I already have a 4-part series on Paine that's on randycredico.com. And they're both, heavy figures.
Yeah, sure.
During that period of time. He wrote Rights of Man, which was in response to Edmund Burke's critique of the French Revolution.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And he was hounded for that, right?
Absolutely. And the whole thing, some historians have called the period of the French Revolution, they call it the Atlantic Revolution. And they include in that the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the Irish Rebellion, and the huge radicalization in England itself, which was the icon of which was Tom Paine. Of course, he was in 3 of those Atlantic revolutions, including the French.
Right. And I'm sure he supported the Haitian Revolution.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it is Bastille Day. Now, Bastille Day, I know it's a symbolic day, and it's a symbolic, pivotal moment in the French Revolution, because that year starts out where they call Louis XVI calls a meeting of the Estates General. Do you want to explain what the meeting of the Estates General was?
Yeah, well, let's go back and say what the problem of the French Revolution turned out to be, and what caused it to happen in the first place. I mean, you can't oversimplify and say one thing caused it, but one of the main factors in leading up to the French Revolution was the fiscal crisis caused by the fact that France spent a lot of money backing the American Revolution, not because they were revolutionaries, but because they hated Britain, and they figured that if they could promote the American Revolution, that would be a blow against their British rivals. So they spent a lot of money on it, got to the point where they were just out of money. They couldn't raise enough money to run the country. So they had to raise...
Can I just chime in here?
Yeah.
Also, there was a heavy drought in the autumn and summer of 1788, which led to skyrocketing prices of bread.
Yeah, that didn't help. You're right. But the lack of money forced the monarchy to try to find new ways to raise taxes. And what they did was they turned to the landed aristocracy, who was, they had privileges of not being taxed for all those years. And all of a sudden the monarchy said, look, we got to tax you. And they said, we don't want you to. So they rebelled. And the irony of the French Revolution is that it began with a rebellion of the aristocracy, which wound up being the class that was abolished by the revolution. So they started something they couldn't stop. And after the, you asked about the Estates General, one historian explained it very well, Georges Lefebvre. He said there were 4 waves of revolutionary action crashing against the monarchy. The first one was the landowners, the aristocrats. That was the aristocratic rebellion. But after they got the peasants involved, and they got the bourgeoisie involved. The bourgeoisie were the wealthy people of the country, but who had no political power because they weren't landowners. So the Estates General was an attempt by the king to head all this problem off. But it was so undemocratically set up that the bourgeoisie decided they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So when the Estates General was held, I think it was in May of that year, 1789, then the bourgeoisie, which was followed, it didn't represent 97% of the population, but it was followed by 97% of the population. They just said, we don't want anything to do with this fake States General. We're walking out and we're going to hold our own meeting. And they did. They held a meeting in a tennis court, and they founded the National Assembly, which became, it was like a dual power situation. You had the monarchical government, you had the National Assembly, and the National Assembly actually had the people behind it. So that's how the Estates General began the thing, but was quickly bypassed.
That's they had Mirabeau was the Henri de Mirabeau was who spent time in jail in I forgot was it Vincennes or something like that. He spent time in jail under what's called letters de cachet, right? Just signed letters. You could just put somebody in, and that's who was in jail,
right?
In the Bastille, the fortress of the Bastille. There were 7 people inside. That's what I'm saying, and they weren't political prisoners. I think the Marquis de Sade was even in there, one of the 7. So this thing, the tennis court oath is on June 20th, and I don't know where it goes from there, but it leads into the storming of the Bastille. So kind of give us a overview of the storming of the Bastille.
Okay, well, as you can see, there's already a lot of Sturm und Drang, a lot of activity going on. People were upset, but I mentioned that there were 4 waves of the revolution. The first one was the aristocratic rebellion we talked about. The second one was the bourgeoisie that formed the National Assembly. The third was the peasants, which their rebellion went on for years. But the big one that really turned the tide was the 4th wave, and that was the urban poor, referred to as the sans-culottes. They were artisans, they were workers, they were people without jobs, but it was the masses of Paris who were getting hungry because, for one thing, the drought and the lack of bread that you mentioned, the price of bread went up. And so they just, when all this was going on in the middle of it, on July the 12th, not the 14th, but the 12th, they went out into the streets in huge numbers. And this was an insurrection unsurpassed in certainly French history, probably world history. I don't know. I won't say that for sure. But it didn't calm down. On the next day, July the 13th, it was bigger. And then on the 3rd day, July 14th, it was so big that it was just unstoppable. And the crowds focused on the Bastille, which, as you said, was an old prison, but they weren't there for the prisoners, and there weren't many prisoners in it anyway. I think you said 7, and I think that's correct. The prisons were full in other parts of Paris, but the Bastille was an old prison that had been converted to be used as an arsenal, where the monarchy stored its guns and ammunition. So what the people were doing, they weren't attacking the prison to liberate prisoners. They wanted to liberate the guns and the ammunition so they could stand up against the Royal Army. And that's what they did. They got the guns and ammunition. But this was not a wild, disorganized movement. I mean, it was the urban poor had a structure. They had leadership. They had organizations. And what they did when they got the guns, they didn't just go shooting everything up all over the place. They formed a militia, a citizens' militia called the National Guard. And that was the power they had, really, against the royal military. Now, the royal military kind of faded away because its members were influenced by this mass mobilization. And a lot of them were supporting the revolution.
Not Lafayette.
Well, no, Lafayette, let me tell you about Lafayette. He was a hero in the beginning and turned out to be a scoundrel in the end. at the beginning, he was the leader of the National Guard, and all of these people who were out demonstrating and in the insurrection looked to Lafayette as their leader, because he was the one who was organizing their citizens militia. And later on, a couple of years later, he turned against the revolution and had to flee the country and wound up in prison in Austria. So it's a long story, but Mirabeau's the same thing. He started out as a hero. Mirabeau and Lafayette were leaders of the revolutionary bourgeoisie. But it didn't take long, maybe a year or two, before the revolutionary bourgeoisie decided they didn't want to be revolutionary. They'd had enough revolution. They wanted it to stop there. But the people that made up that insurrection on Bastille Day didn't want to stop, and they kept going. And therefore, Mirabeau wound up in the king's pay and was an enemy of the revolution. And as I said, Lafayette wound up trying to lead his troops against the revolution. They didn't follow him. He had to flee the country. It's a fascinating story.
Really is. You know, I look back at Marat and Desmoulins and all of these other writers back then. There were so many writers, journalists that would, put out these pamphlets. Marat was the most effective. And I think it was Lafayette that, hunted him down after the events at the Champ de Mars, right?
Tried to hunt him down, but Marat got away. He was, I think you compared him to the
Scarlet Pimpernel.
The Scarlet Pimpernel, yeah. I mean, different politics, but he always got away, and it's incredible. It's I don't know if anybody's ever written a novel other than the Scarlet Pimpernel, but on that subject. But Marat would have been a perfect character, because it wasn't that he had any magic or anything like that. It's that he really was a politically astute person who knew who to trust and who not to trust, and he knew when bad stuff was coming down. He gained this reputation as a prophet, because he would always say days before some big thing happened where the royal forces were counterattacking or something, he would predict it. But it wasn't a prediction. He knew it was true because he had inside sources inside the palace.
Right. So, we're going back still around the Bastille. That it did catapult people to participate in action. The National Assembly, I think, abolished, as you said, the feudal system, and also clerical rights, right? And then in August 26, it was they passed the Declaration of the Rights of Man. You want to talk about and then there was the Wives March, and you talked about this the last time. Back in October 5th and 6th. Can you harmonize those events in a few minutes here?
Well, it's hard. We really do, as you said before, need a lot more time. But you brought up one of the main things is, what the heck did the French Revolution do? What made it important? What did it really accomplish of lasting value? And you mentioned the National Assembly passed the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. Okay, so that provided freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom from arbitrary arrest, and religious freedom, and things of that sort that we tend to take for granted now. But it was a big deal back then. But the thing that a lot of historians, you won't see this much in the standard history text, the real accomplishment of the French Revolution was that it was a capitalist revolution. It was a socioeconomic revolution. It changed the system. As of right now, we have a problem where we need to change our economic system. Well, back 230 years ago, they hadn't even gotten to our level yet. So they had to change from sort of a feudal, what was left over of the feudal system. They needed to dump that completely and make a capitalist system out of it. And that's what they did. And it was the Peasants' Rebellion combined with the Jacobin Republic of May that was launched on May 31st, 1793, that made all that possible. It made the revolution. It couldn't go backwards from that point on. It was it did go backwards a certain amount, because when Robespierre was assassinated, the moderates took back over, but they weren't able to roll the revolution all the way back to the beginning and put the landowners back in power. So that was a major accomplishment that it was never reversed. It was irreversible because of the Jacobin Republic.
We are talking with Cliff Connor, historian and author of this wonderful book on Marat, and he's got a new book on science. How do people reach you? Because we only have a few minutes left. I do have a few more questions, Cliff. How do people access that book?
I'll give you my email address, which today isn't working, but tomorrow will be. cliff.connor@mac.com.
All right. I recommend that book. I've read it several times, and it's really fascinating. It's bifurcated his years as a scientist and then his years as a revolutionary in France. Let's see, it inspired other revolutions. I'm not sure if that was that inspired the Paris Commune, but I think both events inspired Lenin, if I'm not mistaken.
You are not mistaken. There was a series of revolutions that tried to complete or, well, what happened in 1789 to 93 was, we call that the Great French Revolution. And then, there was another revolution in 1830, then another in 1848. These were both important, but they all were building upon the original revolution of 1789. And then in 1871, we just did the 150-year commemoration of the Paris Commune. It was actually controversial in France because conservatives there don't like it.
Yeah.
But progressive people like it.
It's a fascinating history. I think Lenin wrote, and Marx wrote about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Marx
was involved in it.
Huh? Yes, Marx was involved, but he simultaneously was writing about it as it was. I think in the beginning, he didn't think it was going to work. And then he was totally, on top of it and in support of it.
Well, it's a very complex thing. Some people look at revolution and say, oh, it's just the have-nots against the haves. And it's just a fight and that's it, But these revolutions are so complex. And 1871, the Paris Commune, it ended up very badly for the people involved. But what they did, the legacy they left, as you said, inspired the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution. The Chinese revolutionaries knew all about the Paris Commune of 1871.
I'm sure the Cubans did too, and the Sandinistas, right? Well, listen,
absolutely.
Cliff, we're almost out of time here. I just want to say it is Bastille Day. A happy Bastille Day to you. I'm sure you and your wife are going to go out celebrating at some French bistro today and have a wonderful time. And we'll have to continue this great discussion about French history and the Marat down the road here.
Okay, thank you, Randy.
Cliff
Thanks
Connor,
again for inviting me.
All right, we'll be right back. Actually, we won't be right back, folks. We're going to go out with this another version of the, how do I say it? La Marseillaise. La Marseillaise. All right, we're going to play another version of that, and we'll see you next Wednesday, folks, here on 99.5 FM. Free Speech Radio, WBAI in New York City.
Sacré de la patrie, conduit, soutient à nos braves vengeurs. Liberté, liberté chérie, Combat avec tes défenseurs, combat avec tes défenseurs. Sous nos drapeaux, que la victoire accourt à tes mâles accents, que tes ennemis expirants soient ton triomphe et notre gloire. Au pour faire comme tout le monde.